Welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by ATS Research. It's titled Clergy in America, Key Insights from the National Survey of Religious Leaders. My name is Christopher Tay. I serve ATS as Director of Student Research and Initiative Management. I'm welcoming you here to this space. Good to see some familiar names and faces. I want to just give a few housekeeping items for our call and then hand things over to our distinguished presenter. Today's Zoom meeting will utilize the chat to talk with one another and engage people, so feel free to say a little bit about yourself, how things are where you're at, and to say hi to one another. If you'd like to present something for a question and answer, we'll have a period at the end, but throughout the call this hour, feel free to queue up all of your questions as they come up or whenever you feel comfortable to do that using the Q&A feature in Zoom. So those are our two kind of engagement housekeeping items. We'll see each other by chat, and we'll also be able to collect the Q&A through the Zoom feature. Our presenter today is Dr. Mark Chaves, who is Ann Ferrer Scott Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Professor of Religious Studies and Divinity at Duke University. He directs the National Congregation Study, which is a wide-ranging survey of a nationally representative sample of religious congregations, as well as the NSRL, the National Survey of Religious Leaders, which we'll hear about today. And that's a similarly wide-ranging and nationally representative survey of clergy. So without further ado, Dr. Chaves, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Chris and Debbie and Mary for hosting and organizing. I'm really pleased to be here to share these results that I think have that are interesting and particularly interesting, I think, for leaders in theological education. So I'm just going to jump right in by sharing my screen and is that, Chris, is that what you're seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So let me just jump right in. I'm going to show you key findings from the National Survey of Religious Leaders. The National Survey of Religious Leaders is a survey of clergy who serve congregations. It's nationally representative. These are clergy who serve the congregations that participated in the fourth wave of the National Congregation Study. I'm not going to go into a lot of methodological detail, but I hope you'll just take my word for it. I can do it later if you want and questions, but take my word for it. This is a high-quality representative national sample of clergy who serve congregations from across the religious spectrum. I should say it's not just Christian clergy. There are rabbis, there are imams, there are leaders of Buddhist and Hindu temples in the sample, but in small numbers. They're there in proportion to their presence in the population. And the results I'm going to focus on today are going to focus on Christian leaders when I show you results where it says all primary leaders. That's going to be everybody, including non-Christian leaders. But then when I do breakdowns of religious groups, it's just going to focus on the main Christian group, because there's not enough of the other leaders to isolate them for analysis. There's 1,600 leaders, including 890 primary leaders in the sample, meaning people who are the primary leaders of their congregations. And that's the result. Almost everything I'm going to show you today is going to focus on the primary leaders of congregations. We had a 70% response rate from those primary leaders. The data were gathered between February 19 and June 2020, which is before the pandemic. I'll say some things about where you might think things have changed since then. But mainly, I don't think there's much reason to think that anything I'm going to tell you today is much different now than it was when we collected the data in 2020. The data aren't brand new, but this report, we've released a lot of the results relatively recently, and the report this is based on was recently released. It was mainly online, self-administered, and funded by the John Templeton Foundation. It's an omnibus survey. We ask about a lot of different things. We ask about clergy work settings, careers and jobs, about their health and well-being, about their theological views, about their practices and views about mental illness, their attitudes about end-of-life care, their views about science, their political activities and views, what they draw on for information sources, something about their collaborations, who they collaborate with, what kinds of organizations. We asked them what speakers they would like to hear from, and we asked about their challenges. I'm not going to tell you about all this today. I'm going to give you a smattering. I'm not going to go into depth about anything. This is really a teaser to show you the kind of information we have. Everything is available online. There's a report that's available online that has everything that I'm going to say today and more. So I'm going to focus on some aspects of this that Chris and I thought that this particular group of people would be most interested in. So I'm going to start with some demographics about clergy who lead congregations. One thing that stands out is the aging of clergy. The clergy are old, and they are getting older, and they're getting older faster than the people that are getting older. As you can see, oh, I should mention when there's Jackson Carroll here at Duke did a big survey of clergy that was comparable to the NSRL in 2001, similarly high quality sample, and so that's the main. Really the only prior data point we have. So when we repeated some of the questions he asked. So when you see data from 2001, that's from Jack Carroll's Pulpit and Pew study, and that's what this is. And you can see clergy are older. The median age increased among everybody from 52 to 59 in the last 20 years. That's true across Christian groups. This is probably not that surprising, although maybe the pace at which this is happening is surprising. When we look at racial and ethnic identities across religious groups, across Christian groups, the main thing that stands out here is that there's a significant non-white or non-white and Hispanic population of clergy only among Catholics, where a fifth are Hispanic. For the other, of course, Black Protestants are overwhelmingly leaders of Black churches are overwhelmingly Black. Leaders of white evangelical and white mainline churches are overwhelmingly white. Only among Catholics, and it's only among Catholics that there's an increase over time in the non-white presence among clergy. Of course, the percentage of female leaders has increased who lead congregations. Mainly, of course, that's among mainline Protestants. There's big differences, of course. There's still very few evangelical churches led by women. About a third of mainline Protestant churches are led by women, up from 20% 20 years ago. That there's more to say about all these things, but I'm going to get through a bunch of things to show you, and then we can have some conversation at the end. There should be plenty of time for that. This is one thing where I'm going to show you about the secondary leaders. They are different demographically than the primary leaders, this meaning the assistants and associates and various specialty ministerial leaders who are in churches, work in churches. The secondary leaders are less likely to hold the MDiv. They're younger. They're more likely to be female. That's true even in groups where the primary leaders aren't female. Maybe especially true in those groups. Um, okay, more about turning from demographics to some things about their work settings, their careers, and job characteristics. Um, the clergy in mainline and Catholic are overwhelmingly have graduate education. 90% of Catholics, 84% of mainline have the MDiv. Very few have less than a bachelor's degree. That's different in among evangelicals and Black Protestants, where about 40% have the MDiv, and a fifth to a third don't have a bachelor's degree. That's something that is emerges throughout a lot of the results, is that Catholic and mainline clergy look the same in certain kinds of ways that we'll see, and evangelical and Black Protestant clergy look similar in certain kinds of ways. Another aspect of kind of the professionalization of clergy is kind of the flip side. Is we asked whether people the primary leaders were members of the congregation before becoming the primary leader. That's very rare among Catholics and mainline Protestants, but it's not that rare. It's sort of common, a quarter to a third, say, among evangelical and Black Protestants. So it seems like there's still two models of ministerial work in American religion. There's the more professionalized model of graduate education and not drawing people from inside, and maybe a more apprentice model, emphasizing more personal connections to the congregation. Um, this is maybe one of the most surprising to me features of it. Maybe won't be to you folks. The two-thirds of uh, clergy who lead congregations are second career. Um, a third, that's especially true among Black a little less common among Catholics, but a majority of all the Protestants are second career. Um, and that's not doesn't just mean they had a summer job doing something else in college. These were actual like full-time jobs. The in another area, the about a third of all are bivocational, especially common among evangelicals, less so among Catholics and mainline. Um, Interestingly, neither of these shows increase over time. The rates of second career and bivocational are about what they were 20 years ago. Serving more than one congregation does look like it's increased over time. About 20% overall do it. It's more common less common among evangelicals, more common among Black, Catholic, and mainline. And this is the one of those three things. This does seem to have somewhat increased over time. And other evidence kind of points to this. It's not a huge increase, but uh, uh, but it's an increase. This increase is entirely among mainline ministers and Catholic clergy. Okay, I'm losing the ability to advance. Let's see. I don't know what's happened here. Okay, we collected salary. This is the one thing where it probably is out of date. Um, uh, hmm, Sorry, I don't know why. Yeah, this happening. I'm trying to go back, but it's not letting me. So I'm going to stop sharing and restart because that's what we did in the test. And I don't know why. So bear with us. I'm going to end the show and I'm going to restart it. Um, share again and hope for the best. Okay. Sorry about this. Yeah, it's advancing even though I'm not touching anything.
If it helps at all, Dr. Chaves, I do have the presentation up if let me
Yeah,
know.
should we try that? Maybe I don't know why.
Sure.
So I'll stop sharing.
All right. And of course, let me know if you'd like to advance a slide and whatnot.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so this is the the salary in that time. The mainline Protestants make more than others. This obviously is something that probably changed over time. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And this is probably also, I think this is interesting, the percentage of it's much more common in clergy compensation to do housing uh, housing allowances rather than manses. That's declined very significantly over the last several decades. Then let's go to the next slide. This is, we show you, we collect data about for the secondary leaders, again, what their specializations are. You can kind of see at the bottom, I won't spend time on this really, but the religious education and youth ministry are the most common things that people who aren't the primary leaders do, but they do a wide range of things in churches. Go ahead, Chris, to the next slide. Okay, so this is switching now to some different subject job satisfaction. Here, a big storyline is that most primary leaders are happy and satisfied with their work. Virtually all are say they're very or moderately satisfied with their work. Very high numbers say they're satisfied with life. They feel happy. They feel cared for by their congregations. They completely or moderately agree that life is closer to very few, only about 10%, very or fairly often think about leaving their congregations or religious work. This is important, I think, because there's a storyline out there about clergy being unhappy and particularly stressed, and I don't think I don't think it's accurate or it's not complete. There's obviously some who are, but the vast majority are happy and satisfied with their work. Now, there is a caveat here, and that's the next slide, which says, and I'm not sure this is particularly well known, that the mainline Protestant clergy are noticeably less happy than clergy in other groups. So this is those same items that I just showed you before. But separating out the mainline from everybody else. Mainline are just as likely, virtually all of them are very moderately satisfied with their work, but they're less likely to say endorse the highest levels of satisfaction and happiness and all these other things. And they somewhat more often say that they're considering leaving congregational work. This is, we have looked at explaining this. The obvious question is, why is this? And we can't fully explain it. I'm going to show you some other things that you might think explain it. but there's no silver bullet explanation. It's whatever's going on is complex. But I'll say a little more about that as I show you some other things. Um, yeah, turning from kind of satisfaction to health. Primary leaders also say their health, most of them, is excellent or very good. And the key thing, and part of the reason the narrative about clergy being particularly stressed and unhappy is because they don't often get compared to the general population, and that's really important to do in results like this, because it might be clergy are pretty stressed, but so is everybody else. And so the key question is whether they're more or less stressed than everybody else. And so on the next slide, we show you just some comparisons to the on both health and mental health. And clergy do not self-report poor health more than the general population. Their obesity rates have gone up a lot in recent decades, but exactly in line with obesity rates in the general population. The rate at which they show depressive symptoms is the same as in the population as a whole. So, yeah, I mean, there's maybe a health crisis in American society in certain kinds of ways, but it doesn't seem to be, clergy don't stand out in that. And so I think that's an important nuance. This compares some of those same things across the Christian groups. And again, the mainline, the Catholic clergy stand out as being less likely to be obese. That's mainly because they're more likely to be immigrant clergy, and immigrants are less likely to be overweight than native-born Americans. The mainline do stand out again as being on the high side of depressive symptoms, kind of in line with their somewhat lower levels of satisfaction and happiness. Next slide, Chris. Okay, this changes the emphasis that what I'm talking about, the subject, to encounters and practice with mental illness. This is one of the areas that clergy, as we know, are on the front lines, often encountering people struggling with their mental health. And there's been a lot of concern about whether how clergy are dealing with that and what they're telling people and how well educated they are about mental illness. We found that we asked them, "Are you trying to get resources for it?" And the answer is yes. They 3/4 say they sought out resources to learn more about mental illness. Half led a prayer or healing service focused on mental illness, and so on. So there is some attention among clergy to education about mental illness. But we also asked them about their views about depression in particular. We know this is kind of essentially what I already said, that clergy are commonly approached by someone with health mental illness. About 40% in the last year were from the other side. About a quarter of the general population has sought health, mental health help, has sought it from their clergy person. So it's a common thing that clergy are grappling with this, and this raises questions about what they think about mental illness. We explored this by presenting clergy with a vignette that described a seriously depressed woman in their congregation, and we asked them what a series of questions about what they think caused this and what they would encourage the person to do to seek treatment. And this shows you some basic results. Those causes, they were not mutually exclusive. They could say any of them are likely causes or none of them. Same thing with the treatments. And what stands out is how the kind of circumstantial life situation and medical reasons like chemical imbalance or genetics stand out as the most endorsed. And the religious reasons, we asked, what do you think it's caused by lack of faith or even demon possession, are much less likely endorsed by clergy. When it turned to what would you encourage them to do, we asked them, would you encourage them to see a mental health professional? Would you encourage them to take prescribed medicine? Would you encourage religious activities like more involvement in church and prayer and so on. And there, virtually all the clergy say they would encourage seeing a mental health professional. They would encourage taking prescribed medicine. They would also encourage religious activities, but on top of medical treatment, not instead of. And looking at this directly, where we kind of split up. So you can see this is both the two bars on the left are about the causes, the two bars on the right are about the what they would encourage, and it's breaking down. Do they think there's a medical only cause? Do they think there's only a religious cause? Do they think it's both? Same thing on the treatments. Would they recommend only a religious treatment, only a medical treatment, or both? And what really stands out is the dark blue on the bottom, focusing on the encouraging treatment. Only about 10% of clergy would encourage only religious treatment of depression. The vast majority would encourage medical treatment, mainly in combination. They don't not encourage a religious response, but only 10%, a small minority, say only a medical response, only a religious response. That's almost entirely among the most conservative Protestant and evangelical Pentecostal pastors, but even there, it's only about 15% say they would encourage only a religious response. Among mainline and Catholics, it's virtually nobody would say that they'd encourage only a religious response. So we took this as really good news about clergy on the front lines of grappling with people, of helping people who are grappling with mental health issues, and something that mental health professionals should know about, that the vast majority of clergy are going to be allies in appropriately treating people with mental health. Okay. Similarly, clergy are often, of course, grappling with end-of-life care issues and decisions. Here we asked whether they would agree that patients should be allowed to die by withholding medical treatments, and then also whether a patient should be allowed to end his or her own life. So obviously, this kind of similar in the general population. Clergy are much more likely to support palliative care rather than physician-assisted suicide. Although the mainline really stand out here, is nearly half do support physician-assisted suicide compared to very small numbers among the other clergy. We also presented them with, we said, if you're faced with someone who is near death, would you encourage them to hope for a miracle cure? Would you encourage them to pursue palliative care? And here, what stands out is, again, this Catholic mainline on the one hand and evangelical Black Protestant on the other hand. The Catholic and mainline are much more likely to encourage palliative care, that's on the right, rather than much more likely than evangelical and Black Protestants to encourage palliative care, whereas evangelical and Black Protestants are much more likely to encourage hope for miracle cure rather than palliative care. So that's interesting, I think. We asked, this is an open-ended question. We said, what's the biggest challenges you face in your work? And that is by far the biggest challenge. This was open-ended. They could just say whatever they wanted. And by far the most commonly mentioned challenge was some version of declining religious commitment in religion or in congregation or society. And that interesting nuance here is that some of those responses were about declining interest in religion in the larger culture and society, but some of them were just declining the challenge of getting people who are actually in their congregation to be more committed to the congregation and participate in ways beyond just attending services and so on. And yeah, there's more things. The that's the end of the detail I'm going to show you. I just want to say again that we have questions about a lot of different other subjects. We asked about their theology. Um, we asked about, you got Chris advance. These are just the topics. We asked about their political views and activities. We asked about their views about climate change. We asked about their views about science other than climate change and depression. We asked about what kind of information sources they drew on regularly in their work. We asked about their collaborations. We asked about their speaker choices, who they'd like to hear from. Um, and that's where I'm going to stop and leave time for discussion. I do want to, Chris, maybe if you would stop and let me share again. I do want to show you the website, if I can manage that. Um, does that show up, the website? Yes, I see Chris saying this. Okay, great. This is everything I've told you is in this report that I've mentioned, which you can easily get on the website. And I wanted to highlight this for you in particular because I think it'd be a nice resource for classroom use in seminaries and in practical theology classes, in church and society classes, in any kind of a continuing education for clergy classes. I think that would be uh, useful and so I wanted to make sure you know it's there. It's online. I do have some hard copies. Nobody wants hard copies anymore. I don't have that many. We didn't print that many. I noticed there are some librarians here. If anybody wants a hard copy for their library, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to send you one. Um, and so then I will try to stop sharing, but I've lost the stop share. Um, hmm. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Have I stopped sharing?
I think so. And
Okay,
and
good.
the way we did that was to replace with this slide. My colleague Mary has already posted a link to the report. You can also find more information about the report, right, Mark, at this
Yes,
website.
about the study and the report, there's tons of information there. Yes.
Yeah. Also, kind of snapshot. I forget how you called them, but they're like snapshot topical items there that are briefs on certain areas of interest. So do keep an eye out for those items on the site. We will also, as part of our reporting out from this event, we'll have a link to replay, a link to a copy of the slides, as well as the report itself, so you can dig into it and find there's a lot more information that was, of course, left out of our 1 hour time block. But at this point, it'd be great to turn to a time of Q&A. And so if you have been holding on to your questions, do not hold on to them any longer. On the lower part of your Zoom screen, you may need to click the More button and reveal that there's a menu of Q&A items, okay? So like if you click on Q&A, then another window will appear where you can ask, whether anonymously or if you wish to be named, go ahead and type in your question and we'll get those queued up. And so we have a couple all ready to go. There's a common thread right now in what we see. So Mark, we have some questions about clergy satisfaction. And so we'll go ahead and answer those live. Maybe we'll take one or both as you see them here. Tell me, you do see them on screen, Mark, is that right?
I don't. No, I don't.
Oh,
So
okay, let me
maybe
go
you
ahead
could
and
just,
read. Yeah, let me go ahead
yeah.
and read them for us here. There was a question about whether there's any expectation that clergy satisfaction would have changed post-pandemic. So, of course, the survey was in the field just prior to the pandemic, and we've been a handful of years since.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to expect significant difference since the NSRL was in the field?
Yeah. Chris, do you want to put the presentation back up so we can look at slides as we talk about them? That
Yeah,
might
sure.
be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I might
maybe
need to be guided on
yeah,
how far back, but
yeah,
yes, yeah,
maybe the job satisfaction one. I don't have a number, but it was
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry for the whiplash,
Yeah,
but
there you go. That was way
somewhere about
quicker
there.
than
How
I
about
was
that?
moving around. Yeah, that's a great question. I meant to say this actually went in the initial presentation because it's such an obvious question. I think the answer is that it hasn't. This is the one thing that I showed you other than the income one, which is also just obvious because dollars change. But this is the one thing that we worried a lot has changed since the pandemic. The reason I think it hasn't is because Scott Thumma has been doing surveys of clergy since the pandemic and finds the exact same patterns that we found in 1920, including the comparisons to general population. So if you look at, I assume most of you know Scott Thumma's work at Hartford Seminary, um, but if you track that down, you can find some of his results. He doesn't have a full national sample in the same way we do, so um, but when we do look on the things that are comparable, it's there's just the same. And so I think it hasn't. I think it hasn't changed since the pandemic. And the other things I don't even think there's that plausible to think it has to. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but one of the on the challenges, it was one of the things that was very rarely mentioned was incorporating technology. Maybe that's gone up since the pandemic. I don't know, but yeah, this is the one that's just such an obvious thing to ponder, and it looks like that it hasn't changed.
And how about if you looked at differences in age? There was a question whether, let's say, differences in age when maybe younger Protestants in comparison to those who are second career, maybe third chapter of life and older. Did you look at this, Mark, is the question, and could you attribute any difference in satisfaction given any age effects that you saw?
Ah, interesting. We only have recently started to look at that, and it does look like um, younger clergy are less happy in general than older clergy. Um, and there also is some sign that um, uh, uh, part-time clergy, so maybe that would include bivocational, are more happy than full-time clergy. So I don't have graphs on this, and we've only just started looking at it because someone asked us to look at it. So it does seem like younger clergy are less happy. That does not explain the mainline difference. That's true in other groups as well. Um, uh, yeah, I mentioned I was going to say some things. Yeah, I didn't show you detailed results, but one of the ways the mainline stands out is on politics is they're much more likely to be more politically mismatched with their churches than other clergy. They're more liberal than their people, more likely to be more liberal. And that was one of the first things we wondered about. Does that make you less happy? There's a less good fit, but that doesn't explain it either. And so uh, yeah, the younger there is this age difference in satisfaction and happiness, but it doesn't explain the mainline difference.
Gotcha. I'll try to cluster the questions that are like in kind, so I'll ask them a little bit out of order if that's okay with everyone. We have perhaps a similar question about differences in satisfaction. The slide that we're seeing here is the mainline difference, and the person asking is wondering if it's changed over time. So, Mark, has this decrease that we see in comparison to other Christian leaders, is that more pronounced now in the NSRL? Is there anything to compare that with longitudinally?
Um, I don't know the answer to that question. We have that on some of these items. We could look at that in the pulpit and pew data. We haven't done that, so yeah, that's a great question. And I'll make a note to look at it. But as we sit here now, I don't know the answer to that.
And I wonder if that also is an opportunity. I don't know if you have another wave in mind or the future of these studies as time goes on. Mindful that, close to 2 decades had passed since Pulpit and Pew. And so maybe not another 2 decades might pass until another nationally represented survey. But do you have any comments on the next look at data?
Yeah, from your lips to the ears of the funders of this research,
We have it on
which
recording, right? Here we go.
yeah, I would both the National Congregation Study, which we've been doing since 1998, has now done 4 waves, ought to be repeated. We haven't done that since 2018. This that Lilly has been the primary funder, the Lilly Endowment of the National Congregation Study. This was funded by the John Templeton Foundation. I in my I'm biased, but I think both things should be repeated pretty soon. And it's a matter of persuading, getting funding for it. And so I'm working on that, and I sure hope that it will continue. There'll be another
Yeah.
wave.
Yeah. I'll try to ask the question and find the slide that we're at for it. But is it possible, Mark, to map attitudes towards the treatment of mental health with level of education? So respondents who have self-reported their levels of identification, and fix me slide if this isn't the right one. But is there any way to map the attitudes and see that have a correlation with the level of education?
Yes. Yeah, interestingly, we did look at that, and it doesn't, there's not big differences by education. As I say, even among, the least well-educated clergy, so the clergy less likely to have even a college degree or a graduate degree, only 15% say endorse only the a religious treatment. So yeah, it's surprising. I was surprised by this. I was surprised at how low those numbers were. Yeah, that's the right slide. So it's such a small percentage. I mean, there is some difference, but it doesn't fully. It's not a huge difference. That's maybe the way to put it. And, there is some difference, but it doesn't. It's not huge.
Good. All right, we have a question about bivocationality or multivocationality. For those leaders, did the survey delve at all into attitudes or desires, for example, bivocational by choice versus, say, financial necessity? Is there a preference, in other words? Would they prefer to have been univocational, monovocational, one single vocation, or were there outside influences that kind of forced an issue, so to speak? Is this about, did the survey look at preference at all in terms of multivocationality?
We didn't. No, we didn't ask about that. I wrote it down because I keep a list of things we should ask about in the next wave, and that I will put that on the list. But no, we didn't. As probably a lot of you realize, the main challenge in doing a survey like this or any survey is prioritizing what to ask, and there's so many things that you'd like to ask, but you can't overburden the respondents. So that we did not ask those kind of follow-ups. Yeah, that would be great to do that though.
Yeah, for ATS schools that participate in the student questionnaires, here at ATS Student Data Services, we'll often get the question of what to do with the information they receive. And sometimes this is a starting point, right? This is to broach a conversation or to introduce some topic for discussion. So Mark, you mentioned this is useful in the classroom as preparation perhaps for ministry and moving into leadership positions, perhaps serving multiple congregations was one of the slides we saw. But it's also an invitation. When you have the data collected, then as a school, you have some information to go on, whether to confirm or to dig into. And so, especially if you're in touch with your alums and see there's an opportunity, maybe a focus group or some alum event, that might be a nice opportunity to ask this question that Kenneth had about preference or circumstance regarding multivocationality. And of course, there's a literature out there that speaks to this as well. Let's see, we have a question about religious grouping, beyond religious grouping, rather. Mark, did you see any differences regarding a whole host of issues, but like satisfaction, views on mental health? Did you see them in differences in race or the race of the clergy? So particularly this person is asking Latine or Asian clergy. Are there significant differences in how the race of clergy might have been correlated to views on mental health or satisfaction?
Hmm. So on the satisfaction, Chris, you put that up, and I did show you Black Protestant clergy are separated out throughout. Um, uh, yeah, I haven't looked at Latin, Hispanic. Did I show you the, oh, I guess we didn't. I didn't, on that, I just showed you mainline versus others. Uh, the, Yeah, I know what stands out is really the main line. On this, I can tell you that it's the other groups are kind of similar across the board, which is why we felt justified in doing it this way. It's only the main line, which mainly means white clergy, white and non-Hispanic clergy, who show a big difference at the lower levels here. Generally, we haven't separated out Latino clergy, mainly because, except for among Catholic priests, there's just not enough to do reliable comparisons in this sample. In any other group except for Catholic priests, we could do that for Catholic priests, probably because, as you saw, about a fifth of them are uh, 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 Hispanic. But generally we haven't looked at that group in particular. But for the other things, I did show you the Black clergy we could focus on separately uh, from the other. And by the way, that Black Protestant category would include Black leaders of mainline or evangelical, traditionally white in denominations, if the church is predominantly Black. That's what that category is technically. Yeah,
Sorry for
so
the
we
slide
could, yeah, so
flash
there,
time.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the basic demographic breakdown. But we could look at some of the other things if you'd like, where we do have the Black Protestants, but mainly we haven't separated out Hispanics.
Good. We have one or two more questions in the Q&A, and we have a handful of minutes left in our time together. So I'll ask these and invite any final questions from our audience today. So Brady has asked, could you say a little bit about the types of questions that you had asked in the survey regarding information sources? So this is that piece of one of many several topical areas that could take their own webinars perhaps to cover each and find enough detail. But were there any surprises to you about the information sources section? Anything you want to mention here?
Sure. Chris, you want to go down to those slides that they're
Yeah,
kind of way
sure.
down at the
I'll
bottom?
zoom and here we go.
Yes. Yeah, keep going. There'll be, yeah, after. Let's start there. So we asked them in general, what do they consult? Maybe this, let's go to the next slide. I think it's more interesting, where we isolated out the top three most helpful sources of information for their work. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Among Catholics, I mean, there's real differences across the groups, but there's also some overlap. The Bible Gateway, for example, was the single most mentioned resource. That's a resource for Bible study, sermon preparation, and so on, among both evangelical Protestants and Black Protestants. So the Christian Century was the top one mentioned by the mainline. It was Working Preachers, another kind of sermon prep, liturgy help website. Sojourners shows up among Black Protestants. So, there it is. Those are the top three. There's a lot of different things mentioned. Um, so I guess the punchline here is there's real differences across these groups, but there's also some overlap. Christianity Today, especially among evangelical Protestants and Black Protestants,
Mhm.
Christianity Today also shows up as top three mentioned among both. Let's look at the next slide too, Chris, because this is kind of fun. Oh, maybe it's the one, oh, the speakers. It's further down. It's not the next one.
Oh,
Uh,
this one.
yeah, this is kind of fun where we ask them who would they most, if money was no object, who would you most likely to invite? And here it's kind of interesting that Barack and/or Michelle Obama, well, this was of course 2019-20, was the top choice for both mainline and Black Protestants. William Barber was similarly mentioned by mainline Protestants. Tony Evans shows up both for evangelicals and Black Protestants. So I don't know. This was kind of interesting in the way it displays the different cultures that these clergy are embedded in, but also they're different, but they're overlapping cultures. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. There's maybe one more question I see from the chat, and this is perhaps kind of going full circle here, whether things have changed in the last 4 to 5 years, and if you could think through, like hypothesize, if you had run the NSRL last week, for example, what might the data show? And this may be a little bit of prognostication, so to the level of your comfort, Mark, how you'd like to answer.
Hmm.
But are there things that you would expect to have changed if you were running this survey now?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is the one we already talked about to dig into the job satisfaction and happiness questions. I mean, really, all of it. The That's why we need another wave is to assess it. But the job characteristic ones, the bivocationality, the serving more than one church, will that continue to inch up among the mainline and among Catholics? The the I don't know, the politics ones, which we haven't talked about really at all, but that, because those are we asked them about the nature of their activities and the issues that they work on, and the ways that whether that's changed with new administration since the last time is those would be interesting to look at. The challenges questions it would be worth repeating, I think, to see if new things are coming up, more about the technology, maybe as a post-pandemic phenomenon that's broader in broader use. Yeah, the information sources change over time, of course. People come and go, and sources come and go, and whether that has changed. So those are just some things that come to mind. But yeah, each time, like when we do the National Congregation Study, which we've done 4 times since 1998, we try to repeat about 2/3 of the questions in order to track the change over time, and then add about 1/3 of new content to respond to whatever issues of the day that come up. So I would imagine that a second wave of the NSRL would similarly repeat about 2/3 and then add some new content.
Speaking of information source changes, generative AI wasn't on the map like it is now. So that's a very interesting thing also to think about.
Yeah. On
Well,
responses, one other thing just mentioned, we didn't ask when we asked their attitudes about science, we asked about climate change. We didn't ask about vaccines. And that would be one that would be obvious to ask now. Well, what are clergy thinking and saying about vaccines now? It didn't occur to us to ask that in 2019.
right. We'll take one moment of privilege to ask a question for the good of the ATS membership. Mark, if you had some advice to give or some hunches that you would want to see ATS schools really seriously consider based on these data, based on other studies that you're involved with, based on what you're seeing in the literature, what are some key takeaways for ATS schools that are as varied as they are in geography and theology and constituency, but all, if you like, are sharing a current moment. We're all in this same moment. And so if in the next 5 years or 10 years even, Mark, do you have some advice, I suppose, to give to ATS member schools?
So that's above my pay grade, of course, to do that. Maybe one thing I would say is I was been struck by the extent of the narrative about how difficult it is to be a clergy person that's out there. And the data we have just don't support that as the common experience that and so some emphasis on how fulfilling pastoral leadership can be and is in fact to the people who are doing it. Now, of course, we don't have the people who have left, and so that and so I wonder. I mean, I don't know whether the extent to which programming is emphasizing the positive, or, preparing for the negative or something, as opposed to preparing for the emphasizing the positive. But that's one thing that where I think the results we have here depart from a narrative that's out there that might be shaping. I don't know what's going on in seminaries, but that's one thing I'd mention.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, for this presentation today. I want to thank your team as well for the good data that will be useful, helpful in many places, but including classrooms, as you brought up earlier. So I want to thank you again from ATS, and for everyone else, as my colleague Mary has mentioned in the chat, we will send out links to the report, to the slides and recording. Once technology cooperates with us and gives us the ability to do all of those things. And we'll also be sending out an evaluation for this session. So be looking out for those things in your email if you attended today. If you're catching this on replay, we hope that it's been also a useful time to look at this, perhaps in a moment of time, but also interpreting things in the moment that we're in. So I want to thank everyone for making time once again to join us on this webinar, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
And let me say thank you to everyone too, to the ATS folks and to everyone for being here. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you all.